Well, that music was ominous. Uh, Folks, we are here today. You know me, I'm Aaron Schmuckler, the CEO, co-founder, company culture engineer at the Yes Works, where we exist to bring the interests of employers and employees together. We all deserve to have an absolutely fantastic place to work where we feel fulfilled and where we love our time. And our employers deserve to get the best that we have to offer. And those two things are not exclusive. My guest today, Dr. Laura Hamill, I know from our having done previous shows together, feels the same. I am truly honored to have Dr. Laura Hamill with us today to discuss 8 ways to uncover the hidden forces eroding your culture. If you were to have looked at places like Enron, places like Wells Fargo, where people are making poor decisions, let's say, it's not because they're bad people. It's because there were hidden forces at work in those companies. There are hidden forces at work in your company as well, though they may not be as egregious. They are costing you momentum. They may be costing you retention. They may be costing you performance. So Laura and I decided to get together and help you find those hidden forces eroding your culture. Laura, please introduce yourself.
Aaron, thank you so much for having me. This is really cool. I'm excited to talk with you all about this. So I am an organizational psychologist. I've happened on organizational psychology, and I feel so lucky for it because I get to really work on all those things that Aaron just said, right? How do you create great places to work where people want to be and where organizations thrive, right? And get really their best results. So I worked at Microsoft for a long time. I also helped start a software company focused on well-being and left there about 2 years ago. And now I run a consulting practice where I focus primarily on organizational culture. And I'm also writing a book about culture right now too.
Well, as I said, I'm thrilled to have you here. The last time you and I did a podcast, I think was like 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was really fun. So I'm looking forward to having a lot more fun with you again today. Laura has got 4 suggestions for you about how to uncover the hidden forces eroding your culture. I have 4 suggestions for you about how to uncover the hidden forces eroding your culture. And I don't know what Laura has in store for you. She doesn't know what I have in store for you. We may have the exact same 4. We may have 0 overlap. We're about to find out. Laura, what's your first suggestion for folks about how they can uncover the hidden forces eroding their culture?
Yes, good. I can't wait to see what this overlap looks like. My first one is around boards. And I have been unpleasantly surprised at how little boards actually understand culture, care about culture, ask about culture, talk about culture. People on board seem to know, a ton about every executive's compensation, right? A lot more focus on the compensation committee and almost 0 focus on culture. And I have just been really disappointed in that, in my experience, in seeing that boards really don't even know what it is. They confuse culture with kind of anything people related. They don't understand really how to measure it. So that's where I would start, kind of at the highest form of power in an organization through the board. And one resource that I just want to throw this out there for anybody who's interested in this, I loved seeing the National Association of Corporate Directors. So they're kind of a entity that has a lot to do with boards. They put forward a document called Culture as a Corporate Asset. So they really are saying, hey, boards, this is one of the most important, maybe the most important corporate asset that an organization has is the culture. And they do an amazing job in this document talking about how boards should really think about governance, the governance of the culture. So I would, if I was able to start from scratch and really help a board to think about this, I'd have them think about how they get the evidence on a regular basis of how well the actual culture is functioning. So something like a culture scorecard that talks about all aspects of the culture through the whole employee experience. So that's where I would start, Aaron.
I love it, and it's not what I was expecting. So that leads me to the question: for a leader of an organization who reports to a board,
Yep.
what action can they take to ensure that their board is supporting them in accomplishing their aspirations for culture? What can they look for in the board potentially taking action to erode their culture?
Yeah, that's really good. So where I would start if I was, the CEO and trying to get the board to maybe think a little bit differently about culture is I would articulate my cultural aspirations, just what you just said. Like, this is the kind of culture we're aspiring to. This is how it's connected to what we're trying to achieve. This is why we think if we can harness this, it's going to help us get us to where we want to go. And here's how we're going to measure that. And here's how we're going to show you our progress toward that. And then help them really almost ask for their help in that way, right? Like, hold me accountable to this. This is what we're going to keep talking about. Unfortunately, what I've seen over and over again is when that doesn't happen, when there's no clear articulation of what's important, the board will put forward what's important. And a lot of times it has to do with winning,
right,
and money and costs and doing things maybe that go against what you believe as a leader that you stand for. So I would like to see leaders get in front of that to really put forward and almost kind of help the board along in the way that you want to see this go in terms of them helping to govern culture.
And what I've seen with our clients with boards is that very often boards are looking for results now.
Yeah,
Culture is sometimes one of those things where you're playing a longer game for
absolutely.
potentially for greater gains in the long run. And
Yes.
sometimes you've got to maybe take a short-term haircut for a long-term, really higher aspiration.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, that is the reality, right? It's a lot about the here and now, the short-term thinking. One of the things I was just
I'm
on
taking a lot of short-term haircuts.
there's nothing wrong with a short haircut. Yeah, it is a real, I know it's a reality to think about it that way. One of the things that I've been thinking more and more about related to this is how we think about the whole kind of culture story from the very beginning. Because I feel like if we tracked that a little bit more and were able to point back to when we did this shortcut, when we had this haircut, 7 years ago, remember when you asked us to cut our hair 7 years ago? And remember what kind of happened from that? Boy, I think that would help because I feel like there's such short-term thinking. We forget, right? We forget what happened yesterday, and we're only thinking about what is going on with the business right now. And so sometimes I think that if we had more of a culture storyboard, right, that we kind of were tracking over time and we could talk about those things with a little bit of proof and evidence of what happened last time, we'd be in a better place.
I think that storyboarding, the following the progression, the beginning, like here's where we started, the before picture, right?
Yes.
So important.
Yeah, completely.
All right. Well, it's time now for my first suggestion about how to uncover the hidden forces eroding your culture. And the place to look is where you are frustrated with other people's behavior. So if you as a leader find yourself frustrated with the people who report to you, the people who report to them, if you find yourself going home and complaining to your spouse, whatever you are complaining about is pointing at something.
Yes.
People do not behave in a vacuum. People are not unaccountable in a vacuum. People are not entitled in a vacuum. So wherever you are frustrated, look to yourself as a leader. How am I showing up that this is persisting? Look to the environment. What is going on in the environment? What is going on in the way that that our company is structured such that people behave this way? And I'll give you one example, and then turn to you, Laura, for your thoughts. We had a CEO come to us and say, "I've got great people on my front lines, and I've got great people managing them, and I don't understand why they're at each other's throats all the time. Why are they fighting?" And what we discovered was that there were 15 people reporting to each of these managers. They'd done a great job hiring conscientious managers who worked hard to drive performance. And 15 people is just too many to manage, especially if you want to build strong relationships of the kind that will stand up under the pressure of conscientious performance driving management. And so that's a structural issue that if you look at that behavior, and to his credit, this CEO said, it's not the people. There's something going on here that these great people are behaving poorly. So there you go. What are your thoughts?
To his credit, that's awesome. Because I remember being in a conversation with the CEO who said, I think I should just scratch all the employees and start over. I literally had somebody who said that to me.
Wow.
And like everything in me to not like just jump all over him and talk to him to help him understand more about the systems and structures, right? And so I'm so with you. I think there's some I've got to find this research study that talks about I think it's like 70% of the variance in organizational performance is around systems and structures. It might even be higher than that, where we tend to think it's about individuals, right? It's about high performing individuals and motivating individual people. We spend a ton of time talking about individuals, which I get, right? I get, but really the science says that it's about these systems and structures, right? And culture is probably the most important system in this set of systems. So it's really interesting to me when people do that, and I think that's great advice, Aaron, to think about that and to uncover that a little bit. And yes, you're right. Our topics are completely different in how we approach this, but it's a big sign when leaders think it's people aren't hungry enough, or people, I see this in some clients I'm working with right now, where they feel like people are slow. Like everything's really slow. It doesn't move fast enough.
Yeah.
Like, well, that's interesting.
Or, I've got renters and I want owners, right?
Right.
All these behaviors do not exist in a vacuum. And I think about my own career history. And if I were to simply evaluate me on my performance in different jobs, there are some jobs where I would look at me and I would say, I want that guy working for me. And there are some jobs where I'd look at my performance and I would say, I do not want that guy working for me. And it was the same guy. It wasn't just the progression of my own personality and work ethic. It was the effect of the environment on me.
Completely. And this is why I love culture. Well, one of the many reasons why I love culture so much and love studying it and working on it and thinking about it is because culture shapes us, right? Culture shapes how we behave in the system that we're in. And we all sort of know that, right? But boy, when you start into a new job and you start to see these new ways that this place does things, it's really obvious, right? It's really in your face when you're in your first week or your first month of work. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they talk like that in meetings, or I can't believe nobody stood up and said anything in town halls, right?
Right.
That's what's so fascinating, is it completely shapes us. It tells us how we need to behave in this situation. And it sounds so like victim-y, like you're just done to, right? But you're not, right? You are an adaptable, smart, learning human being, and you're figuring this out, and you're doing what everything around you is pointing to you to do. So you're smart, right? You're adapting to the situation. You're adapting to the system. but you become part of it. And that's what's so interesting is pretty soon you don't even see it anymore, right? You see it right in the beginning, but you don't see it over time. And that's why culture is so hard. One of the reasons why culture is so hard to change is because you're part of it, right? You don't even see it affecting you.
Uh, Laura, we've got a question from the audience, and so before we go to your second suggestion, I think this is a great cue to us that we should be defining culture. Richard asks, would you consider culture as clusters of behavior, be direct in communication, or that is consistent with strategy? So, how do you define culture? And then I'll share how I define culture, and then we'll move on with our program.
No, that's great. So thanks for the question. So, this is what I think is tricky about cultures. It's so multifaceted. I tend to use Shine's definition of culture around the norms, values, and beliefs that are collective, that we share. It's kind of like a mindset, right? It's a way we think about how we do things in this place, in this place that we are together. So the norms and values and beliefs can be articulated, right? That's being intentional about culture, which is what I really hope more organizations can do. But being intentional about culture is trying to put down in words what you want that culture to be. And so to get to your point about clusters of behaviors, that's one way to do it, is to say, gosh, if we're trying to create this culture that will help us be successful, here's where we want to start in terms of what that looks like, how we do that. And so those clusters of behaviors sometimes are associated with, your values. So you take your values and really try to define them and then behavioralize them. So I like to see those behaviors, because if we can't even articulate what we mean by the culture we're trying to achieve, right? We can't it's never going to be demonstrated by people. So that is an important part of it, but it's kind of the way to operationalize your culture. It really doesn't necessarily completely describe your whole culture. It's just trying to have us focus in some areas and be really intentional about it. So there's the idea of like your whole culture, and then the culture we're trying to really place an emphasis on.
Yeah, I love that you're making a distinction between what is our culture and what do we want our culture to be. And if you're aspirational, they're never going to be identical.
Right.
I remember a leader who handed me a packet, a paper packet, and said, "This is our culture."
Okay.
No. And I think my definition is very similar to yours. I think of culture as the set of contagious behaviors in an organization. They are the tendencies of thought, the tendencies of behavior. And by the way, all behavior comes from thought, and all behavior is contagious, right? So that's why crowds behave differently from individuals.
Yes.
So if I forget who it was, I forget, because when I looked it up, I found it ascribed to a bunch of different people. The quote that just punches me in the gut every single time is, your culture is defined by the worst behaviors tolerated in your organization.
Yes, I love that so much. It's so true. And what you put up with, right? What you
That's
put up
right.
with versus what, you can talk about all the things that you reinforce, but it's also about all the things you put up with as well. The contagious part is a big part of culture, right? When I first started studying cultures, when I was at Microsoft, I got to do this really cool, we did a custom culture assessment for Microsoft for the whole company. It was such a neat thing to be driving and to be a part of. And what I was really focusing on is the science of culture, right? Like I was really all about the measurement and how we were going to get really clear about the logical aspects of culture. And in retrospect, and what I've kind of learned over time is how much the part that's kind of get to with the idea of being contagious is. So one of the things that I really focus on in the book that I'm working on is this idea of hearts and minds, right? There's the mind part of culture, the logical and science part of culture, but there's also the heart part of culture. And that's the emotion, that's the inspiration, that's the connection, that's the contagious aspects of it, right? Because we see human beings doing these things. Yeah. And so I think that's the part that I get really like, I feel like there's so much to learn and so much to understand about the heart part.
Yeah, and you brought up values, which are an essential part of any culture. And it's, we can all put our values up on the wall, right? These are the values that we say
Yes.
we hold dear. And if you want to know what your organization's values are, you got to look at behavior.
Yeah.
Behavior tells you what your values are,
Yep.
not the signs on the wall, not your website, not what you say in team meetings. And if there's a gap between your behaviors and your stated values, then there's some work to do.
You think? So that's one of the things that I was digging into recently. Again, when I keep saying I'm working on this book, it's such a good way to get your thoughts, clear. But one of the pieces that I'm looking at is when there's a disconnect between saying, here's who we are, here's what we stand for, and then people don't experience that. And
Yeah.
I use this big term, I call it cultural betrayal. But I think that's how people feel, right? They feel betrayed when they think they're
Absolutely.
hired in and this is what this place is going to be like. And they get there and they see people not acting in that way. It hits you hard. It hits you deep.
I wasn't going to give this example. I was going to move us on to your second suggestion. And because you've said that, I've got to give this example of a company that hired us because the leader said, one of our core values is above and beyond. And anytime I ask somebody to stay a little late, they roll their eyes. If people are just not going above and beyond, there are all kinds of ways in which people aren't going above and beyond, and I wonder why they're not. And when we talked to the folks who worked there, what we learned was that people came in, just like you were saying, believing that above and beyond was a cultural norm, a value of the company. And then when they were trying to serve the customers, they did not have the authority to go above and beyond. They had to go and ask for permission. So-and-so has had a bad experience with us. I'd like to do this. I'd like to give them this gift to make it right. May I do that? So the fact of having to ask for permission was one blow. And then the fact that they almost always were declined was the second blow. And so people were told, we go above and beyond around here. And then it was proven to them, no, we don't. And so everything in them that wanted to go above and beyond was shut down.
And then surprise, surprise, they don't want to go above and beyond. I mean, this is the thing. It's so natural, the outcome that you get when you look at what's really happening, right?
Yeah. All right. We promised the people 8 ways. So Laura, what is your second suggestion about how people can find these hidden forces?
Yeah, this is classic, and it fits with kind of what you were just saying, Aaron. It's around leaders. So the CEO and C-suite, when there's a disconnect between the lip service that leaders are giving about culture and their own behavior. And sometimes, luckily, it's not this regularly, at least, this real obvious, like, egregious way that the leaders aren't living the values. Luckily, I mean, sometimes it is, and that's just awful, right? It's an awful place to be. And if you don't take action, if you don't do something about that, if we don't make it apparent that that's not okay, either by, first maybe giving that feedback, but then letting that person go, then that's a huge problem. It's really hard to create a positive culture if leaders aren't the best at it. They aren't role modeling it. They aren't demonstrating it. But there's another part that I see actually more often. It's that leaders just don't understand their own power. They don't understand the impact that they're having on the organization. And they don't understand the megaphone that their own behavior is. And it can be something as simple as, looking at their phone while another leader's presenting an important, all company presentation. It can be yawning or dismissing or telling a joke to somebody when somebody else is speaking. I mean, the megaphone of leadership behavior and how much of a disconnect that can show with, the culture we say we want to have and what really is important and what's really valued. But a lot of it's what you were just describing is when we have like all these other things that don't align with what we say is important. And it can be, a lot of times it can be things that are in the people system, right? Maybe we say our values are important, but we don't hold people accountable to them in performance review, or we don't develop people about our values, or when we do onboarding, we don't even mention our values. There's a lot of things in the people system that can happen, but there's also all the other systems, right? Like how we serve our customers, like how we think about strategic planning and what gets prioritized, how we think about what gets funded in an organization, what kinds of projects, the classic, we're in an innovative company and we never prioritize any work on innovation or fund any
punish people for failing, right?
Yes.
It's like, well, if you want to do new stuff, you're gonna pursue some dogs.
Yes, you're going to make mistakes, right? And so that's, to me, is just having those disconnects. And I just see that over and over again, is leaders kind of going against the culture. Again, luckily, it's not always in this really explicit ways. A lot of times it's in ways that leaders don't even understand they're being looked at, observed all the time. And that people draw incorrect conclusions many times from the behaviors that they see, but they're doing it, and leaders aren't aware, right, of how big of a megaphone they have.
Yeah, I mean, I think of that also in terms of leverage, right? You've got a loud voice, you're way out on the lever, right? So every small action you take has an outsized impact on the organization.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, now speaking of alignment, you and I have come back into alignment.
Okay, good.
My second suggestion is to really study your assets, all of the assets in your organization, and especially the employee handbook, to carefully look for insults to employee integrity and intelligence, and for alignment with your values. So I can't count the number of organizations, and this is one of those things that it hurts my heart to see an organization that says our core value is trust. And then you open the employee handbook, and on every page it says in no uncertain terms, we don't trust you as an employee as far as we can throw you.
100%.
Right. When you get back from bereavement leave, please bring a death certificate or an obituary. Can you imagine a greater insult to somebody's integrity, a greater insult to their trustworthiness? If that alignment isn't there, if you are insulting people's work ethic consistently, then you are sending the wrong message, and you are eroding the culture, and you are alienating the folks who you probably most want to keep.
Yes, that's such a good one, Aaron. But let's be honest, how this goes down, right? How do you create a handbook? Because I've been there, done that. The way this goes down is, oh crap, we need a handbook. Let's hire an employment attorney to give us one.
Or buy one off the shelf, right?
Exactly, right. On LegalZoom.com or whatever. Exactly. And we just go buy it, and we copy them, insert, our name where it says company name in brackets. Yes. And there's not a lot of thought given to what the message is. We think of it as like just this formality, right?
Yeah. And I did a LinkedIn post that I said, friends don't let friends add policies. Right. And what happens so often is we have somebody on our staff, somebody who's part of our team, who out of ignorance or out of frustration or whatever, they're on their phone on the sales floor, let's say, right? This is a common complaint about new employees in retail, is they're on their phone on the sales floor. So instead of having a manager walk up to them and kindly say, hey, when you're on your phone on the sales floor, you look like you're not engaged, you look like we're not welcoming, I'd like you to please never be on your phone in the sales floor, wait for your break and do that in the break room.
Right.
Right. Can I have you do that? And you get the commitment, right? That's a way of treating people with respect. And then we think that we need our policies and procedures to be foolproof. And so we go, all right, now let me crack open the employee handbook. let me get out my pencil, let me sharpen my pencil and say, all right, the policy is no cell phones on the sales floor. And now, congratulations, you are insulting people's intelligence.
Yes. Because you never can have one to cover every single situation, right? It
Right.
just feels and when you're in the foyer and when you're behind the desk and
Right.
yeah, it's ridiculous, right? Because you can never have enough to cover every single possibility because you've already broken down the trust, right?
And smart leaders erase policies in favor of relationship building. Mary Barra became the CEO of General Motors. She took their 14-page dress code and shortened it to, I'm going to tell you the whole dress code. Dress appropriately.
Yes.
This does not eliminate conversation. It creates conversation, which, by the way, is one of the carriers of culture.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. That's a great example.
So we've got another comment. Sean asks, how can large organizations balance internal culture with the public, like Budweiser, Target, Disney recently? Thank you for this excellent conversation. Well, happy to be having this conversation. What are your thoughts about this? And I'm not quite sure how to understand the balance of internal culture with the public. We're gonna do our best here.
Well, first of all, I know Sean Porter, and hey, Sean Porter. Sean Porter is awesome. So what I'm assuming he's talking about is when you have something like the things that have been happening with these organizations and that have this big external piece, right?
Yeah, where you behave publicly contrary to your stated values.
Yes. I think that puts an organization in a really tricky spot. I've been there a couple times in some organizations that I've been in where we believed in something really strongly and we did something differently for a customer that they were kind of putting pressure on us to do. And the angst that created in the organization, and I think the way it kind of chipped away at our employees' confidence in us was real. So I think that this is when the rubber hits the road and you've got that kind of external pressure. I think you might think that you're doing the right thing by bowing to the pressure from the public, but I think what it does to your culture and what it does to the employees' belief in who you are and what you stand for is a much longer cost to pay or price to pay. So I kind of wish that some of these organizations would have stood by where they stood originally.
One of those places where you might take that short-term haircut.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly. It's right back to that conversation, right? And we don't hear as much about those kinds of things as we do, these really big examples. But I would, if it was me, I would have tried to find a way to stay true to who we say we are and just work through the pain of what's going on, and that would be my advice.
I think about Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, right? Where he talks about a brand gets loyalty when people believe what the brand believes, when people believe what the company believes. And so it can be painful to alienate some of the world by saying, this is what we believe in, whether that's, hey, we did this and you don't like it and we stand by it, or we did this and this is not in keeping with our values. We really made a mistake.
Yes.
And when you demonstrate, we really do believe what we say we believe. We're willing to say mea culpa, or we're willing to say, if we're not for you, then we're not for you. Then you will, like all good marketing, alienate some people and attract the loyalty and rabid fanhood of others.
Yeah, completely.
All right. Laura, we're back to you for your third suggestion about how to uncover these hidden forces.
You can see a little theme here of like how I'm going from the highest positions of power, kind of working my way down.
Yeah.
But the next one is around managers. And I feel like, managers get a bad rap a lot.
Yeah.
And I really feel like they're caught in the middle. And so if you just even think about some of the things we were already talking about around boards and leaders, managers oftentimes are not kind of equipped with the communication or the information that they need. They're not equipped with the time they need, any kinds of tools and resources they need to help the culture come to life, to be able to operationalize the culture with their teams. And so a lot of times, we'll hear this thing that people leave their managers, not their companies and things like that. And it's just like, I don't know. I think managers are just one more part of this system that oftentimes have not been really supported to be able to bring the culture to life. And a lot of times it's the empowerment piece that you were bringing up before, Aaron. It's like a lot of times managers don't have the ability to make some decisions or to really help in specific ways in the culture. And so they're the ones who look like they're at fault when really it's this bigger system that's not supporting them. So one of the things that I often do in terms of trying to uncover all like these different levels of power in organizations is I put this in an employee survey, right? Do managers in this organization consistently demonstrate the values? Do leaders in this organization consistently demonstrate the values? And what's interesting when I do that in lots of different companies is that you can see sometimes leaders do and managers don't, managers do and leaders don't. And it's fascinating. And I also like to see just employees in general, if they do. But I feel like
a bobblehead over here. I just like, yep.
I think you and I are both doing that to each other. I just think that there's a lot of opportunity with helping managers understand what we mean when we're talking about the aspirational culture and what we want the culture to be. And we just assume that they get it and that they understand it and that they're putting it in action every day. And they a lot of times aren't because they don't really maybe understand it themselves, right?
Yeah. And I love that you brought back also to authority, the very often, kind of like when we write the policies to make our employee handbook foolproof, we withhold the authority to make the decision foolproof. And how did we as leaders get to have the wisdom that we have to make these good decisions? It turns out by making mistakes. And so
Yes.
if we can think about the errors that we might permit our managers to make and the costs of those errors, I'm not going to say that those errors won't have costs.
Right.
Sometimes those costs may be great. If we think about them as tuition,
Aww.
right? How much would you invest for manager Bob to have the same kind of incisive ability to make decisions that you have? Well, then why not invest and
Yes.
think of his mistakes as tuition?
Tuition. That is so good, Aaron. I like that.
I do too. And, I think about the people who invested in me that way, right? There are people who invested in me, sending me off to trainings. And I just remember kind of the awe and gratitude I felt in my first job where I was sent off to make, to get training. And I think about the awe and gratitude I had in the first job where I was actually given decision-making authority, even small little decisions like what food are we going to put in the snack bar for our clients. Those decisions where I could make mistakes and did, not only did I learn from them, but I also just gained tremendous gratitude for my employers.
Yeah, completely. Because they have faith in you, right? And that's knowing that even if you made those mistakes, you're going to be okay, right? Like that's a huge gift.
Well, that's going to bring us to my third suggestion. which I didn't even realize I was already talking about, which is look for misalignments between responsibility and authority. It is a special kind of torture to have a responsibility to deliver result and not to have the authority to get that result. And one of the places where I think we all can experience this special kind of torture is when we call centers. You've got a complaint, you call the call center, you say, I'm having this problem. And they say, sorry, there's nothing we can do about that. Or you say, but I think in this case, because of the special circumstances, X, Y, and Z, I deserve a refund. And they say, I'm sorry, we can't give you a refund. That's the policy. And I say, okay, understood. May I speak with your manager, please? Not because I want to get them in trouble, because I want to find the person with the authority to give me a refund.
Yeah.
And they say, my manager is going to tell you the same thing that I told you. And I say, okay, that's fine. I'd like to speak with your manager. And they say, my manager is going to tell you the same thing that I told you. And we go through this cycle a whole bunch of times because they are measured on their ability in a lot of call centers to resolve a customer complaint in a single call in as little time as possible without escalating. And they are penalized for my calling back a second time, which I'm going to do if they don't say this is the policy. They're penalized for my staying on the phone longer, which I'm going to do if they don't say, sorry, there's nothing I can do about that at the end. And they're penalized if I escalate it to their supervisor. So they're required, they're measured on their ability to satisfy me, and they are not given the authority to satisfy me. And so instead of having a human interaction, we have a tortured interaction.
Yes. And call centers, I mean, it's so egregious, right? It's so in your face, that disconnect. But, I see this a lot also in kind of more undermining behavior, politics in organizations. When you think you are owning something, you think you are driving something, and then somebody else swoops in and changes the direction,
Suddenly it's gone.
I used to always kind of call that politics and game playing, but to me, that's part of the culture, right? And many times it's somebody who has more power than you do, who has decided that they're going to do that and that is okay and legit for some reason. And maybe there is some reason you don't understand, but it never seems to get, described to you. It never seems to be explained, right?
Yeah.
Is why that happens. But I think that's that talk about cultural betrayal, right? When you think that this is something that you're responsible for, you think that this is your lane and you get to own this. And then it ends up that you don't. I was just talking to somebody this morning who was telling me a story like that about a large tech company that we all know where that was happening in a pretty big way. And I think it really does something to you as a human being to feel like that's pulled away from you, right? It really impacts you when you have that kind of misalignment.
Yeah, there's a certain mourning that happens, right? We feel bereft all of a sudden.
Yes, completely. And this is, again, why I think culture is so important, because we're talking about real human beings here, right? I mean, we tend to talk about what?
No, these are machines that we give money to so that they'll get shit done.
Right. But we tend to talk about culture like, oh, it's Netflix's culture, or, this company's culture, that company's culture. But really, at the end of the day, we're talking about how this is impacting human beings. Mm-hmm. And to me, everywhere I go, and I bet you get the same thing, Aaron, you'll tell people what you do and they're like, will you come and help my company? We need a better culture here. It's like, anybody I talk to says that, right? And they'll start telling me a story about something sad that's happened to them.
Okay, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I've been wanting to kind of check this experience with somebody else, and now I get to. Do you have the experience, as I do, that when you're talking with somebody lower down in the organization, the lower you go, the more likely they are to say, "Oh my God, we need you," and the higher up you are in the organization, they say, "No, we're good. Our culture is awesome."
Well, yes, and I have some data and facts for you on that because I've actually studied that. I had this opportunity to study about 40 organizations, and what I found is that satisfaction with the culture was the highest at the highest level in the organization, and as power went down, it was the lowest. And I mean, it's probably not a surprise that that's true. But that's interesting because this is all before COVID, and so there are some really interesting signs that maybe being in a position of power ain't so fun either.
Oh,
And
there's no
right.
question, right? I mean, ask any leader,
Yeah.
is this fun? And they'll say, well, maybe it depends on the day. It
Yeah.
sure as hell is hard.
It's hard. Yeah, for sure. But I'm with you on that.
All right. Laura, before we hear from you about your fourth and final suggestion about how people can uncover the hidden forces eroding their culture, I'd love to have you tell the good people at home when and how they might want to get a hold of you.
So what I usually do is I work with organizations who are interested in either first forming their culture. So they're at the beginning stages of starting an organization where you're trying to be really intentional about what kind of culture we want to have that will allow us to be able to achieve this really aspirational strategy that we have. So for culture formation, but also culture transformation when there's a significant change in the ecosystem of some kind. If you have a whole new leadership team, if you're radically changing your strategy, that would be another part. And then the third way is called culture embedding, when we have already decided the kind of culture we want to have, but we're trying to figure out how to make it real so that people don't feel that sense of cultural betrayal. How do we weave it into everything that we do? So culture formation, culture transformation, and culture embedding are the different areas that I focus on. And so if people wanted to reach out to me, you can see my name here. It's just laura.hamill@parisphoenixgroup.com, or you can look at my website at parisphoenixgroup.com. I'm also writing a book. I got a book deal with The Economist. I'm writing a book on organizational culture. So it's called The Power of Culture, Unlocking Hearts and Minds at Work. And I'm just finishing it. I'm in my last week. I have to turn it in at the end of this week. So that'll be coming out next year.
Terrific. Thank you. Folks, I wholeheartedly recommend you get a hold of Dr. Laura here. And Laura, it's time for your fourth suggestion.
This is, I would call this like employee pockets. Because what I've found in my work is that many times there's a shared understanding or shared experience of the culture, but sometimes there are certain pockets with certain groups and certain teams, maybe with particular leaders that are really struggling, that they're having some sort of particular leadership issue, that they're not feeling, they're having a lack of psychological safety. I see maybe some of that undermining, collusive kinds of behaviors we were talking about before, or just low energy, really feeling like they're giving up. So I think it's important to use your employee survey to dig into which groups are really struggling. I think it's important data and information to see, oh gosh, everybody's experiencing this kind of uniformly in the employee base versus there's this one group or these two groups that are really having a hard time. So I would say digging into that, any kind of demographic breakouts that you can look at in maybe an employee survey. But of course, confidentially, this is at the group level, not at the individual level, that I'd want to understand it, because back to our original point is I'm confident that there's something about that system, right? That system at a team level, at a department level, maybe it's the manager, maybe it's the leader. There could be things going on for that group of people. So that's one thing I would do, is really dig into that. And then second, I would just ask employees. I just like to talk with employees, do focus group with employees. How are you experiencing the culture? Do you feel like people live the values? In what ways are they living the values? In what ways are they not living the values? Which of our values are strengths? Which of our values do we need to keep working on? So having a conversation and a dialogue with employees about the culture is really important. And I find that many organizations don't do that. They don't have that ongoing conversation about culture. They might have an employee survey that they administer, but they don't have that conversation. So that's where I would go.
That's terrific, right? And the pockets may show up in surveys, they may show up in interviews. They're also going to show up in things like turnover, or if you've got a group that's got especially high turnover or especially high retention. I remember a company that we worked with where everybody was meeting their objective or their objectives for billable hours, except for one group that wasn't meeting their objectives for billable hours. And why is that? There are signs everywhere.
Yes. Are we just reading them, right? Are we seeing them?
Yeah. Right.
Really.
And back to your earlier point, are we thinking of them as systemic, or are we pointing our fingers at people?
Right. Completely.
All right. Well, folks, I'll give you a thought or two about how and why you might want to reach out to me. We talked about managers. At the YesWorks, we've got a what we call our managers upskilling sprint to give managers the bare bone tools. This is how we manage people around here. The essential tools for managers to have to effectively manage people with compassion and heart. Another time that you might think about reaching out to us here at the YesWorks, one of the best conversations I've had all week was with the CEOs of two companies that are planning to merge, and the conversations we've had about how to get the greatest strengths of each company's culture to be what wins the contagion war, because they've got some overlapping strengths and some overlapping weaknesses, and they've also got one of the organizations has strengths where the other is weak, and vice versa. So how do we create the combined organization that has the greatest strengths? It's gonna involve inoculating against those weaknesses and deliberately reinforcing those strengths, and finding the ways to do that in ways that are fun and inviting. Because as we've been talking about a little bit, it's about more than intention. It's about more than individual will, how people behave in organizations. I am the only Aaron Schmuckler on LinkedIn, so you can easily find me that way. And you can email me at aaron@theyesworks.com. I love having these conversations and happy to have these conversations with you at no charge. Look forward to talking. All right, Laura, are you ready for my fourth and final suggestion? Yes. Go home every day and ask yourself, how did I support and challenge the people in my organization today? I think there is always danger in the pendulum swing. And if we look at Jack Welch style business management, it's all challenge all the time, and you better meet the bar or exceed the bar, or you're out. Or we can swing too far in the other way, and we want to have a very supportive environment. And I think about one client where they had somebody in accounts receivable who said, it's just not me to call people and tell them that their fees are late. And to permit that is too much support and not enough challenge. And what we find is that people are fulfilled when they are both supported, when they are accepted for being who they are, and also are challenged to be bigger, better, more tomorrow than they were today. That's what I want. So, and anytime I ask people, if the challenge was going to be fair, if the challenge was going to be kind, how many of you would want to be challenged at work? 100% of the hands go up.
Right.
So how did I support people today? How did I challenge people today? Are you doing both? And are you doing both a lot?
That's so good. And it's looking in the mirror, right? I love that the last point is what we all can do, because we always can do it better, right? I know I can. There's so much that I can learn and get better at. But the whole support and challenge thing, it's I think my mom said this to me when I was like 10, right? Like, it's all about moderation. It's the pendulum swing thing is such a real, I mean, and if you've been around for a while, you've seen a couple different times where the pendulums come back and forth.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. It's the yes and, right?
Yes, right. Both. It's not a balance.
Yeah.
It's not about how do we balance the interests of the organization against the interests of the individual. It is how do we get them both going?
Yes.
All the way.
Two things can be true at once.
Yes. All right. I thought this was going to be fun. Turns out it really was fun.
It's very easy and fun to talk with you, Aaron. So thank you so much for having me.
That's very kind. Thank you so much for joining me on this. I'm thrilled because, if I had written my own list of 8, it would not have been the same list of 8. And so, speaking of one of the culture values, right, the cross-pollination,
yes.
Love that you joined me. Love that the folks who follow me, all 3 of them, got to have the benefit of your experience and wisdom.
Oh, Aaron, thank you so much. This is so much fun. I hope there's more we can do together. Really cool.
I'm sure there is. We'll have to find it. And maybe, folks, you will be lucky enough to be some of the recipients of the fruits of that.
Awesome.
Thank you. Folks, we will see you next month for another 8 Ways. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.